The United Nations meeting room was bright. Dozens of flags hung on the walls. Leaders from every part of the world sat under golden lights. Cameras flashed. Translators whispered, but then everything became quiet. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, wearing his green uniform, walked calmly to the speaking stand. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't smile. He just looked at the world leaders with sharp eyes and a tight jaw. "There are things I need to say," he began slowly, his voice steady. "Not for clapping, not for favor, but for fairness." No one moved. "Today I speak not as a soldier. I speak as a son of a continent that has suffered for hundreds of years." Some diplomats moved in their seats. Others looked at their translators, confused. Traore took a breath. "We welcomed you. You took our gold. You took our land. And when we cried, you sent silence." Gasps echoed. Cameras zoomed in. The meeting was live in over 100 countries. Still, Traore didn't blink. And somewhere in the second row, Donald Trump's face became tight. What was this African captain about to tell everyone? The silence was over. The storm had begun. "I come here," Traore continued, carrying names. Names the world never said. He pulled out a folded list. It shook slightly in his fingers, not from fear but anger. "These are the names of 138 children," he said, "all under age 10. All died from hunger in Burkina Faso this year alone." The room fell into heavy silence. No Western newspaper stories. No state funeral. Just dirt, silence, and a mother screaming into her hands. A few leaders looked down, but Traore didn't look away. He turned to the U.S. group. "You sent us weapons, not wheat. You trained our armies, but not our teachers. Why?" Trump crossed his arms. He whispered to someone. His jaw was clenched. Traore leaned closer to the microphone. "You want to talk about democracy?" he said. "Then tell me what democracy lets children starve while rich people count profits made from their suffering." The air in the meeting grew colder. Many in the audience sat frozen. A few nodded slowly. Trump leaned forward, clearly annoyed. His translator stopped speaking. The room was changing, but Traore was not done. "Today, I will speak every truth you tried to hide." No. From his jacket, Traore slowly pulled out a brown folder. Cameras zoomed in. Diplomats whispered. Trump leaned back. "This," Traore said, holding it up, "was never meant to be seen." He opened it carefully, showing printed papers, maps, and photos. A U.S. document dated July 2022, signed and sealed. It explains the plan to take African resources in exchange for military. Silence. Gasps exploded in the room. A woman in the German group grabbed her earpiece. A reporter dropped his pen. Ray's voice never wavered. "You claim to fight terrorism? But what about the terror of poverty, of hunger, of silence?" He pointed to one photo in the file. "This is a village in my country, bombed by accident during a drone mission. No newspaper story, no apology, just ashes." Trump moved in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He whispered to his helper, and then suddenly he stood. The room turned. Trump threw his earpiece on the desk and walked toward the exit. "You can't say that here," he shouted. But Traore didn't stop. He lifted his eyes and spoke one more sentence as Trump walked out. "I thought this was the house of truth." The audience was dead silent, but something had just been set free. As Trump stormed out, the camera stayed on Traore, but he wasn't watching Trump. He was staring at the file. He pulled out a photo, creased old, almost torn. "This boy," he said, voice cracking just slightly, "was 7. His name was Yakuba, wore the same red shirt every day because it was the only one he had." The screen behind him showed the image. A small child smiling. His ribs were visible through the thin cloth. 3 weeks after this photo, Yakuba died. Not from war, not from sickness, but because his village's water was poisoned by mining waste. Gasps again. "He never knew who made money from it, but I do. And they're sitting in this very room." No one moved. Traore's voice was low now, barely more than a whisper. "Your companies made billions while our children drank poison." Silence. Didn't ask for fairness. He asked for bread. Traore looked down. "I told his mother I would speak his name, that someone would finally listen." The photo stayed on screen, frozen, and millions watching from home began to cry. "I buried my own mother in silence," Traore continued, eyes locked forward. No world leader came. No headlines, just dust. Looked up, pain sharp in his face. "She died because there was no hospital. Nearest one was 86 kilometers. Away, she walked halfway, then fell down. The room was frozen. And when I wrote to help agencies for help, I got an answer. He held up a letter yellowed with age. Due to changing priorities, your area no longer qualifies for medical help. Someone in the back gasped loudly. And yet, Traore said, turning toward the delegates, a U.S. drone base was built just 3 kilometers from her grave. It cost $110 million, he paused. No medicine, but plenty of missiles. A few people in the room bowed their heads. One African delegate wiped his eye. Traore pointed to a map. This is not just about Burkina Faso. It is Mali. It is Congo. It is every mother forced to choose which child gets to eat. He folded the paper quietly. I don't need your pity. I need you to stop pretending this isn't happening, right? And across the world, more people began to whisper, cry, and remember. The U.S. seat sat empty now. Trump had left, but not everyone ignored Traore's words. Across the room, a woman, an ambassador from a European nation, stood up. She didn't speak. She simply removed her earpiece, walked to the center of the room, and whispered, "I'm sorry." The room turned. I was stationed in West Africa. I saw what we did. I saw how we smiled for photos and looked away from the graves. Tears ran down her cheeks. We thought no one would speak. But now you have. Traore didn't smile. He just nodded. I don't want guilt, he said. I want honesty. He reached into the folder again, this time pulling out a report. Blood-stained. Help was denied. To this village, because it got in the way of foreign business, he looked at the audience. This isn't just about Africa. It's about what you trade for power. Then something strange happened. A delegate from Asia stood, then one from South America. One by one, people rose to their feet, and the world watching. Liv began to realize this wasn't a speech. It was a reckoning. The camera stayed fixed on Captain Traore, his hands gripping the sides of the speaking stand. I want to show you something, he said softly. He turned to the screen behind him. Photo appeared. A boy lying on his stomach. His back was covered in dark, swollen scars. This is my brother. The room froze. He was taken to a gold mine when he was 12. The company said they were offering jobs, but there were no helmets, no food, just children with shovels and guards. With sticks, Traore's voice cracked for the first time. One day he fell down from hunger. They beat him for slowing down. The room gasped. I was 19 when I found him. He couldn't walk. Traore stepped back. They called it foreign business. We called it slavery. A diplomat moved uncomfortably in his seat. Another wiped their eyes. My brother lived, Traore added, but he never smiled the same again. He turned back to the audience. Tell me, what does your country's wealth mean if it breaks the back of a child? There was no clapping, just silence. And an entire world watching now completely still. Traore held up a small cloth, a baby blanket, faded and torn. This was found under a destroyed village, he said. The village no longer exists. It was knocked down to make room for an oil operation. Lights dimmed as a satellite photo appeared on the screen. A wide, dusty patch of land where houses once stood. No moving help, no warning, just machines. He looked down. There was a family, a father, a mother, and a child, just 6 months old. Traore held up a second photo, a mass grave marked by a cross made from scrap metal. The oil deal was signed in 2021. It was approved by 3 governments. One of them is represented in this room. He looked directly at the Western delegates. The baby blanket was still in his hand. This cloth, he said, voice shaking, was wrapped around a child whose name the world never learned. A woman in the audience began crying. I went to that place. I knelt in that dirt. And I promised if I ever got the chance to speak for them, I would. Then Traore looked into the camera, and now I am. As the meeting continued in stunned silence, Traore did something unexpected. He pulled out a letter. This, he said, holding it up, is from the UN office. It asked me to change my speech, remove the parts about us operations, about business deals, about names. He paused. He placed the letter on the stand. And just 2 hours before this meeting, a delegate came to my room, said, if you say too much, you'll lose friends. Traore's eyes burned. I didn't come here for friends. I came for truth. The audience stared, motionless. Some of you, he said, sweeping his gaze across the hall, have made peace with unfairness. You say it's complicated, but it's not. He pointed again to the baby blanket on the stand. A child buried under oil is not complicated, it's evil. Then he leaned forward. You can block my words, but you cannot block the tears of a mother burying her child. The camera zoomed in on his face. The world watching had goosebumps. And for the first time in years, truth was louder than politics. Traore cleared his throat. His voice had dropped lower, slower, as if heavy with memory. This, he said, pulling out a burned school book, was from a primary school in Jibo. He turned it around to the camera. Cover was melted at the edges. A child's name, Fatima D., was barely readable in pencil. This school was burned to the ground, not by terrorists, but by hired soldiers paid to secure resources. He paused. There were 43 children inside. Only 11 made it out. A woman in the press section choked back a sob. I visited the village 2 weeks later, Traore continued. A mother came to me, shelled this book to her chest and said, "This is all I have left." The room was ice. He turned toward the camera. "You say you're bringing peace." Yes. But what peace uses fire to erase futures? Traore placed the book gently on the stand, like it was made of glass. Then he looked up. Fatima wanted to be a doctor, but now her only memory is ashes. The image of the book alone on the stand went viral within minutes, but Traore wasn't done. The deepest pain was still to come. He pressed a button. The screen behind him lit up, grainy drone footage from 2021. A convoy of black trucks rolled through the Sahel, flying no flags. The timestamp flickered. No press was allowed here. But this footage was leaked by someone who could no longer stay silent. He turned to the crowd. These were private contractors funded through a shell company in the West. As the video played, the trucks stopped outside a village. People ran. There were no warning shots. The screen turned black. 3 hours later, 28 people were dead, not rebels. Farmers. Gasps echoed across the room. We'll find no. Report no accountability. But we kept the names. We remember the faces. Traore pulled out a hand-drawn picture. A child's drawing. A sun, a tree, a man with a red scarf. This was drawn by a boy named Musa. His father was one of the 28. He held it up. Musa doesn't talk anymore. The picture shook in his hands. And I ask you, how can your silence be louder than Musa's sadness? Now some delegates were openly crying. But Traore still had more, because the final photo was personal. He reached into his folder one last time, and this time he pulled out a photo. It was blurry, dusty, but clear enough to see a woman in a blue dress holding a young boy, barely breathing, beside a well. The entire room stared. "She is my aunt," Traore said quietly. The boy was her son. Oh. He held the photo gently, like it could fall apart in his hands. They walked 6 kilometers for water. The well had been poisoned by illegal waste dumping from a foreign mining company. He paused. She tried to carry him back. He died before they reached home. Traore placed the photo down on the stand with both hands. "She begged me not to speak. She said, 'You will make enemies.'" He looked directly into the camera. "But I made her a promise that the world would know, that her son would not die in silence." He stepped back. Then he said something that shook the meeting and the world. "Some of you in this room signed the deals that killed him. That's when Donald Trump had stood. That's when he shouted. That's when he walked out. And the internet caught fire." Traore's voice softened. "I got a phone call the night before this speech. It wasn't official. It wasn't recorded. But I remember every word." He paused. The room held its breath. The voice on the line said, "We know what you're planning. Speak, and you won't leave New York with your dignity or your life." Gasps echoed across the room. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning dressed in power. He placed his phone on the stand. "But I'm still here." He looked around the room slowly. "I am not afraid." One African leader stood in silent support. Another followed. Traore's eyes welled just slightly. For too long, Africa has been told to keep quiet, to stay small, to trade its truth for survival. He pointed to the screen behind him. A map appeared, highlighting dozens of secret deals involving resource taking across West Africa. Signed, hidden, erased. And beneath each deal, the name of the companies involved. A red box circled one. It read Trump International Energy Holdings. The room exploded with whispers. Now the picture was clear. "That was the name," Traore said. "That made Trump rise." "I never knew my father well," Traore said quietly, held up a faded photo. A man in uniform standing proudly beside a mud hut. He was a soldier too. He died when I was 12, tacked on a dusty road outside Wahiga. Traore placed the photo down gently. "But before he died, he sent me a letter." He unfolded a small paper, yellowed, torn at the edges. In childlike handwriting it read, "Son, one day you will face them. Not with guns, with words. Don't be afraid to tell the truth, even if it breaks you. Traore's hands shook slightly. He died believing his truth would never be heard. The camera zoomed in on his face, raw, vulnerable. I carried that pain for years, until now. He looked at the audience. And so today I stand here not as a rebel, not as a president, but I stand here as a son, as a brother, as a man who refuses to forget. The silence was overwhelming, no clapping.
Just the bit sound.
People crying in their seats, and somewhere backstage a journalist whispered, "This is history." "There's one more thing," Traore said, reaching into the folder one last time. He held up a white envelope. "This is a letter I sent to President Donald Trump 4 years ago." Rooms shifted. Journalists leaned forward. Camera zoomed in. "I sent it during a famine in the Sahel. We had nothing. No help, no rain, no attention. I thought maybe he would listen." He opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. It was written in French, but the screen behind him showed its English translation. "Mr. President, we are dying. Not from war, but from the weight of being ignored. Please, if you can help us, we will never forget it." The room was frozen. I never got a reply. Traore looked down, his voice cracked. Instead, a U.S. company signed a 40-year lease on our copper reserves. A photo flashed on the screen. Thousands of Burkina families walking miles for water. "You say we're poor, but you never count what was taken from us." He folded the letter again and placed it beside his father's note. 2 letters. One from a dying father. One to a deaf world. And the silence after, louder than any speech. Traore took one last breath, then he stepped away from the stand. For a moment, the entire meeting stood in complete silence. Not a cough, not a whisper. Then it happened. A delegate from Norway stood and clapped, then one from Brazil, then the entire African Union. One by one, world leaders, some teary, some shaking, stood to clap. Many weren't clapping for politics, they were clapping for truth. For the 7-year-old boy in a red shirt, for Musa, for the baby wrapped in a blanket beneath poisoned soil. A BBC journalist tweeted, "I've covered 27 meetings. I've never cried behind the camera until today." Live feeds flooded with comments. "I'm in tears. This man speaks for all of us. Why isn't this all over the news? I didn't know who Traore was. Now I'll never forget him." And yet Ibrahim Traoré didn't raise his fist. He didn't smile. Simply picked up the 2 letters on the stand and walked out of the room. As he did, even critics stood and bowed their heads. Because in one day, one man had changed the conversation forever. Within 24 hours, the video had over 200 million views. From village radios in Burkina Faso to classrooms in Brazil, people watched in stunned silence. Your children gathered around TVs in markets. Teachers paused lessons to play the full speech. Entire newsrooms aired it without commentary. People weren't just watching, they were crying. A letter from a mother in Haiti went viral. I watched with my daughter. We cried together. She asked me, why did no one ever tell us the truth before? Universities across the world added the speech to their classes. Union called an emergency meeting. But most unexpected, a group of retired U.S. veterans released a public statement. It read, "We were used, lied to. We stand with Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and we are sorry." Meanwhile, Trump refused to speak to the press. But it didn't matter anymore. The world had already spoken. The story was no longer about politics. It was about healing and Traoré. I had quietly returned to Burkina Faso, where 1,000 villagers waited with drums, tears, and open arms. But there was still one thing left to say. Traoré stood alone at a small grave. The wind was quiet. The sky was soft with dust. He bent down slowly and placed the photo of the woman in the blue dress, his aunt, beside a flower carved from stone. Beside it, he laid 2 things. His father's letter and the white envelope. Trump never answered. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "They heard you." The whole world did. A tear ran down his face, not for show, not for politics, but for peace. Behind him, children played in the distance on new school benches built from donated wood. A hospital was being painted by volunteers. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had started. All because one man refused to stay silent. Traoré stood, wiped his eyes, and looked toward the horizon. Then he whispered to no one in particular, "Truth doesn't die, it multiplies." The screen faded to black. If this story touched your heart, don't leave quietly. Drop a comment. Let your voice be heard. Like the video if you believe truth still matters, share it so the world never forgets their names. And subscribe because the next truth is coming. Asterisk.